Okay, when we're working with our neck again here, first thing we're going to want to do is come to the planer, and we just want to clean up both the sides on the planer. Right now, our width on this is almost 3 inches. And let's just clean up a little bit off both sides, maybe get all the way down to 2 3/4 for your overall width on this. I'm going to go 2 15/16 for my first pass, 2 14/16, then 13/16, and then 12/16 would be my last measurement here. So we're just going to go 2.937. Put it into the planer. Again, we want to have it on its side like this. You can have it facing this direction or this direction to start, but again, just make sure it stays upright and not tipping over. Now we're going to flip it over the other side. Just take off another 1/16 of an inch. Continue doing this until we get down to 2 3/4 of an inch. We do want to trim the end of this nice and flat, and so like mine right now, when I glued these 3 boards together, they're close, but we're going to go to the miter saw, trim that nice and flat, and then again trace this pattern on here. So I'm actually probably going to go miter saw that flat first, and then I'll come back and trim this on here. We don't want to take off too much, just trim the tiniest little bit just to flatten that up. Take that pattern and we're going to line this end up nice and flush where that's at, and then just position this in whichever direction it needs to go so that we can get this whole amount traced somewhere on here. So if I'm looking at mine, just lining that up flush here, and then it looks like right there I can get the whole thing attached. So that's pretty flush on top as well. Just going to hold that nice and still and draw a little pattern here. We're going to go to the bandsaw and cut this out carefully. Again, we want to leave our line so we can sand it down to our line, cutting our curves here. You probably don't need to sand or cut too much underneath here because we're going to do a lot of shaping to the neck later. So I probably won't touch underneath there, but I'm going to get this part cut here and a little curved part cut here. Make sure we raise up the guard high enough to have your board fit. Just enough that it'll slide through, but your fingers won't hit anywhere. And again, just be careful, leave your line. Don't cut off your line. So we want to leave a little bit so we can sand it down to the line at the end. Again, I'm not going to cut any of this underneath here yet because we'll do some shaping later, but I am going to get this little curve here. Eventually we're going to get all this nice and smooth and sanded. Just try to get it close to where it needs to be at first. We'll come over to our horizontal belt sander to sand that top right down to our line. I'm also going to sand the very top of this just to make this a nice flat surface. I'm not worried about underneath yet because I'll get that shaping stone done later. Again, just flattening that out. And then we'll come down right on the top surface just to flatten that whole top out. Okay, the next thing we're going to do on our neck is we're going to cut a tenon on the end here, and this is where it's going to attach to the body of our ukulele. And all I've done so far is just found the very center, just put a little mark where it's at in the middle. And then you're going to come over and get this jig, and this is how we're just going to mount our neck here. And we're going to use a router that has a straight bit in here with a little ball bearing. It's going to follow a pattern on our jig to help cut this tenon. And if you're doing a ukulele, I have a little spacer board that I want you to use because I use the same jig for my guitar. We don't want to cut as big of a tenon on the ukulele, so it's a little bit smaller. So we're going to take our little ukulele spacer board and just line it up right in the middle. And then take your neck, again make sure you've found your little center point, because on my jig here I've got a little center mark also we're going to line this up at. So I'm just going to place my neck here. I'm looking at my center points and getting those matched together. And then we've just got our little clamps. We'll just kind of adjust on here and tighten this down. So you want to make sure that these are really tight so that this doesn't wiggle at all. So just double check everything. If things are moving or shifting, just kind of adjust it better. And really get these nice and firm, these clamps. So we've got it nice and tight up against the end here. It's not wiggling or moving on me. So I've got it fairly tight. We're now ready to cut our tenon. Again, we're going to use this router with a straight bit with the ball bearing. And we only want to have this tenon be 5/8 of an inch thick. And so just take a tape measure and measure down on your neck and put a little mark at 5/8, because that's how deep we're going to be cutting that tenon here. So just put a little mark right at 5/8, and that's where I'm going to adjust my router bit to. So you can see my line that I've drawn. And when we take our router here, again, that's how deep it needs to be, lined up right where our router's at. However, this is quite a bit to take off in one pass. And so we're going to do this a little bit at a time. I'm going to loosen that and twist the router bit so I only take off maybe about half or so first. Then we're going to come back and adjust the router to the right height for the second pass. So for this first pass, I'm just going to take a little bit off. Again, this jig, the ball bearing on our router is going to follow the outline of this. And we just got to get all this removed. So you just place your router in here. Once that ball bearing hits that, it'll just glide right along there. Be careful not to lift your router up. You got to keep it tight down the whole time until it's stopped, because if you lift this up, that ball bearing is no longer going to be rolling on the edge, and now it's going to start to cut into my jig, and I don't want to do that. So just going to follow that outline, and then we'll adjust our depth and cut it again. Try not to have the bit touching any board when you turn it on, so kind of get it right in the middle area. Again, you're keeping firm pressure down when you turn this on. Again, when I'm turning this off, I'm going to leave it down until it's fully stopped. Then I can pull it out of there. And all we've done is just follow that little outline, and we've done about half the depth that we need right now. I'm going to adjust that router bit down right to my line and do that same thing again. We can loosen our quick release. As you twist this, it'll raise or lower that bit. checking where my mark was at and getting my bit just positioned right at that exact 5/8 inch deep. Because that's how long of a tenon we want to cut here. Lock that in place, and we'll do that exact same cut. Okay, we'll go ahead and take it out of our jig here. Just undo those clamps. And there is our little tenon for our neck. Okay, our next step after we've got that tenon cut is we are going to attach a little head plate to the top here. Just gonna glue on a little piece, and I've got a whole bunch of these little pre-cut ukulele head plate boards that you can grab. They're about a 1/16 of an inch thick or so. And where we're going to attach this, we need to make sure that we get it right where the head is going to be at. And I've got a couple templates here that we can use for this. For the fretboard template. So this one here is just the ukulele neck template, and it shows this edge lines up with the body of the ukulele, where this one is the full fretboard template. So we'll use this one later on when we work on the fretboard. Just get the one that's the partial fretboard template, but especially where it shows where it lines up with the body of the ukulele. So we'll take this template, and again, where we're lining it up at, we're not putting it on the end of our tenon, we're putting it where the body of the ukulele is going to be matching up. And I'm just looking at my center line, getting that lined up with the center of my tenon. And preferably get this straight if you can. And then right there, so I've got it flush right where it comes here, that's where this head plate is gonna line up. And on the template even has a spot where the nut's gonna be. And so all I want you to do is just trace right where that ends, because that line right there is right where this board will need to be glued on, right there, straight. And then eventually we'll cut that head template out later on. We just want to try to get that line drawn where this is going to be at. Just get some glue put on here, line it up straight, and we'll just clamp that on, let it dry. You can look at which face you want it to be facing out, whichever one you think is the best looking. And then get this glue covered on the entire board here. Spread that around so it goes all the way to the edges. No dry spot. I'm just going with my pencil line, just lined up right where it's at. And we'll get that clamped on with some of these ham screw clamps. Checking my line, looks good. And get quite a few clamps on here, get it nice and tight. No gaps anywhere. We'll let that sit and dry. Don't forget to make sure your name's on here somewhere, because if you've cut it off or sanded it off, just get your name rewritten on it. Just make sure we know whose is whose. So again, about 30 minutes to let that dry.